Welcome back to the Super Data Science Podcast, everybody. Super excited to have you back here on the show. And today we've got a special guest calling in from Switzerland, Thomas Obrist. Thomas, how are you going?
Hi, Krill. Thanks a lot for having me. Very good. How about you?
Very good as well. Super pumped to finally have this podcast. We've known each other for quite some time, right? Like what? It's been a year and a half or 2 years?
Yeah, I think around 2 years. 2 years ago we met.
2 years. Yeah, and you've had quite a interesting career growth since then, right? So you've moved from. I think were you still finishing university back then when we met?
I think we just met after my master's degree. So I started my training at Axpo. And since then, now I'm the quant for short-term trading for Axpo origination.
Gotcha. And how are you feeling about this podcast?
I mean, it's great. I'm a bit nervous, but it's going to be fine.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be fun. Lots of cool topics to cover off. But before we get started, before we dive into your profession, your role, tell us a bit about like what your background is. What did you study at uni? And have you always been in Switzerland? I forget. Are you originally from Switzerland?
Yes, I'm born in Switzerland. I grew up in Switzerland, and I studied in Switzerland. So I studied mathematics at ETH in my bachelor's. Mostly focused on probability theory and statistics. And then I worked as a 1 year as a consultant, like a gap year between bachelor's and master's. And then I did my master's in quant finance. But with my math background, I mostly focused again on the math part, on probability, and deepen my knowledge in probability theory. During my master's, actually, I got really interested in data science. Back then it was not that long ago, but still during my year, any IT course or lectures or data science or like more machine learning approaches, they were not part of my curriculum, but I took them anyway because at ETH you can basically take more or less every class. You just don't get the points. I mean, they write it down on your diploma, but you don't add it up. So I took a lot of IT lectures during my master's because I think it was pretty fun to take. And I was using it for my master thesis. So my focus was like probability theory, a bit IT, and then some finance lectures on top of it.
So you, what was the thesis?
My thesis was the topic. I actually don't remember the full name. The topic was like I use deep reinforcement learning to predict Bitcoin prices.
Oh wow, man, that's so exciting! And were you able to predict it?
I would say not really. Actually, should you use it again? The issue was like it was during the hype. So during the hype, everything went up. So it went to I think January
2018, end of 2017, start of 2018.
It went up to 21,000. Yeah, end of 17. So during this time, the every algo would have worked nice because if you only go long and everything goes up, nothing can fail. So, but then at the end of 20,
kind of like Tesla stock prices right now.
Exactly, like you cannot fail trade Tesla for the last half year because
this is not trading advice for everybody listening to this podcast, right? Like we're not advising to buy or sell any kind of stocks. It's just a speculation, I guess.
And it's like a huge move. And during this time period, you can run an algo, and the algo basically cannot fail if you can only go long because in 18, 17, like a lot of the exchanges, they didn't allow us to go short. So you could not design an algorithm who would kind of short Bitcoin. Now there are way more exchanges who were able to do that. But so therefore I designed as well the algo who always goes long. And goes to dollar, like long or dollar. During this time period, like the back test or in out of sample testing was kind of.
Thomas, can you explain long and short? Maybe some people listening, I just realized that it's not common, terms that maybe some people are not familiar with.
Okay, of course. easy speaking, without all the financial transaction, if you go long on an asset like Tesla, you are betting basically that the stock price will go up and you profit from an up movement. But if you go short, you're betting that the price goes down. So assuming you would have shortened Bitcoin at 21,000 and you would have closed your position at like 10,000 and you have one Bitcoin, you would have made 11K by Bitcoin going down. So you can bet on both directions. It's basically long and short. And it's just a directional view. So exactly. So my back test and my out of sample testing for my master thesis was really good, kind of. But then even whatever algo you have, while during the period afterwards, where it fall from 21,000, I think, to the lowest was like $4,800 dollars of Bitcoin. During the time period, if you only can go long, you automatically lose all the time because you do long, or as soon as you do something, you basically lose. So the algo was not that nice. I think the issue was as well for like a deep reinforcement learning that the time period you have for Bitcoin to actually do something was not huge. So there was not that much data. So now I've kind of been more advanced, I would say, after some years of actual using data science in real work environment. I would say my algorithm was kind of overfit quite heavily because there was not so much data. Another thing is like there's not so much fundamental data where you can actually predict like what's Bitcoin dependent on. Like what should you use in impact? Yeah, you could use like all the indicators and build a lot of stuff based on price data, but there's not like something more fundamental, like, I don't know, oil prices correlated to Bitcoin, to some extent perhaps. I never tested, but it makes it really difficult to actually fit such a heavy structure like a deep reinforcement learning framework to Bitcoin prices. So now with my modern experience, it looks like heavily overfit, like not heavily overfit. So the generalization is kind of bad. And the issue is kind of for Bitcoin, you have limited data, and then this data is kind of fake as well, because actually you have just one realization of reality. Like it's a stochastic process, but you actually just observe one timeline. This is how life is, but this is kind of difficult for trading because actually, like in the situation when you want to predict Bitcoin at 2K, like $2,000 value, it's a complete story, different story than at 20,000. But if you use like a deep learning neural network, you assume kind of independence so that they have more samples to train on. But this is actually not true because they're heavily correlated. To some extent, people behave differently if Bitcoin is at $10,000 than they were if Bitcoin was at $10. So even if you have history, the points are not independent of each other, and like the whole bull run. This is difficult then to generalize on.
Okay, yeah, I totally understand. So the way I understood it is that your deep reinforcement or reinforcement learning algorithm is looking at prices as just price points which compare each other or compare in comparison to each other, and like movements in the price. It doesn't really care whether it's 20,000 or 20 euros, but for people that's a big difference in terms of psychology.
Exactly. Like the issue is not like that I had like inputs like the price itself. It was kind of standardized, normalized, and so on. So there was not like 20,000. The algorithm knew exactly it was 20,000. It was more looking at difference between how it moved. But the psychological factor, there was a lot of times where Bitcoin kind of stopped before 10,000 because just a change from 4 numbers to 5 numbers had a big impact on how people behaved. So Bitcoin was really traded like heavily, like with a psychology approach. Therefore, there was a lot of emotions in the market basically, and was really dependent on the level where it was. So an algo who kind of got standardized inputs, he was not aware of this, and how could he? Because how you treat emotions to a trading bot, you can build features based on 10,000 could be like I don't like a 1 or a 0 or something like this, and you can make borders or you can build features around this. But then you need to know which they are, and if you already know them, why should you build an algo for doing it? Like, then you can just trade it. Like, then you don't need a huge structure. Like, I mean, if you know where the borders are, then there's no point in using an algo. Then you just trade it.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode is brought to you by Super Data Science, our online membership platform for learning data science at any level. We've got over 2,500 video tutorials, over 200 hours of content, and 30 plus courses, with new courses being added on average once per month. So all of that and more you get as part of your membership at Super Data Science. So don't hold off. Sign up today at www.superdatascience.com. Secure your membership and take your data science skills to the next level. Okay, very interesting. But let's move on to what you do now. So tell us a bit about your role. So you're the lead data scientist at Axpo Origination for West and East Europe. What is Axpo and what does the company do?
So Axpo Group is a Swiss utility. So in Switzerland, we have a lot of assets, like there are river plants, water pump storages. There are as well some nuclear plants, which are more like partially owned or mostly owned by Axpo and operated on. But myself, I work for Axpo Trading, or Axpo Solutions, as it's called. This is part of the group. And what we do, we don't have any assets. We trade around them. So we bring the assets of Axpo to the market. Because like Axpo Group itself, the utility, they just produce energy, but we manage their assets, like their energy. Actually, myself, I'm in Axpo Origination. So I have actually nothing to do with Switzerland. Axpo has as well some trading activities in other parts in Europe and in the US. So, for example, myself, I am the quant for origination, so for a short-term time part. So I do everything about data science and quant stuff for several European countries like Belgium, France, Netherlands, Austria, Czech, Slovakia, up to Turkey. What origination is? Origination is basically if you are a steel client, my department could offer you a contract to supply energy to your production for the next 2 years or 1 year or 3 years, such that you're hedged. So if you're a steel producer, this is really nice because you don't need to worry about power prices. I mean, you can produce as long as you want because you are basically don't have any power risk. We take the risk for these companies and we manage this risk. Mm-hmm. And then gotcha. We have this PPAs, it's called. This is power purchasing agreements, where we buy the power from wind parks and solar parks. Assuming you build huge wind parks, then you don't want to worry about like production risk as well. I mean, production power, the power price risk. You just want to have a good power price for your plants, and then you want to produce as much as possible. So we take care of this risk as well. So we manage this wind parks on the market for people who have built these parks. There's part of the company who build wind parks as well and solar parks for Axpo, but it's not the trading part. So we just manage them after they are built. We manage their production on the market. So we go and sell, try to hedge it.
It's like Axpo is a massive company. On one hand, produces energy itself with different kinds of energy, with different sources. But then on the other hand, you also purchase energy from other companies out there, wind parks and solar parks and other energy producers. And you also sell that energy, supply and sell that energy to whether it's clients, not like mom and dad clients, but like big companies, like you said, a steel production plant, which requires lots and lots of energy per year. And you create agreements with them so that they know what they will be paying for energy in the next year, 3 years, or 5 years. Is that about right?
Exactly. So we managed we manage the risk for all. Yes.
Okay, good. So so you said you're a quant. What is the difference between a quant, a data scientist, and a data analyst?
Yeah, like, so for example, a data analyst, we have a lot of analysts, not data analysts, but analysts. They study the market really deep. So they read through newspaper, I don't know, Russian newspaper, and try to see where gas prices might be going. Or they read all the news regarding nukes development with nuke breakdown in Germany. I mean, happened, but or in France, what's going to happen in France? What politics decide, political regulation. So it's less. I mean, it can be quantitative, but it is a lot of seeing where markets are going based on news event and other stuff. So it's not doesn't need to be quantitative because it's just a lot like they have a lot of experience and they read and see where. And we have I would say, I differentiate now between like data science and quants. I mean, I think they're kind of a mixture, and a good quant can use data science while a good data scientist has quant skills. I mean, here I see a data science, like a people who go have a training set, a test set, and build like machine learning models on top of it. While quants, they can run simulations, like Monte Carlo simulations, and then they can calculate the probability. And based on the probability, they can make a price. And if this price is better than what you get at the market, you go and buy and sell. So it's kind of a different approach. It's both really data heavy. So like you both do a descriptive analytics of the data. But I would say the methods or mathematical methods they use is a bit different. So, I mean, traditionally, like you see a lot of quants in risk management to do pricing and analysis, but you can do as well like quant related models for trading, like predictive models as well. It's less, I mean, I would say like easy quant models to differentiate, just as an example, would be kind of, you look at stochastical outliers. So you calculate the probability if something like this happens, which is an outlier, you assume this will follow afterwards. Because if you look at outliers, there you have like you don't need to, but like you might have higher correlations between different prices. While a data scientist, I mean, he can think of these things all as well. Like it's not like excluded, but I would say like the approach is a bit different. You go and you try to build models, you filter the space, try to build features. Like the language is a bit different. At the end, the models don't need to be necessarily hugely different, but like I would say the language is a bit different. And I think right now, since there are a lot of data scientists quite new to a lot of companies, I think it's a little bit split. So what a quant does and what a data scientist does. I think in the future, depending on which field, of course, they will mix a bit because I believe that like, I mean, you need to, if you want to be a good quant or data scientist, you just don't want to use just a hammer. If you need to solve something, you need to have a saw. So like I see it like one tool or any other, but a good kind of worker can use both tools. So therefore I split it a bit differently between these three groups. I mean, the analyst, he can do a lot of things as well. Like he could do data science models as well. I mean, for his daily work, most times he doesn't just need it. So I will differentiate the three different groups.
Okay, interesting. So I'm specifically interested in the quant versus data scientist. Let's dive into that a bit more. The difference between the two models. Like for a data scientist, if let's say you want to do a simple prediction of price based on a linear regression, you just use you have your training data, you have your test data, very straightforward. You pass it through the your model, and there you go. You have a model. Like how, in this, simplifying things, how would you say a quant approach? You said Monte Carlo. How is that different? Like, what is the principle thinking behind it that is different?
I would say, I mean, in general, a quant goes and perhaps like, okay, he looks at, for example, different quantiles. So assuming like a linear regression, you would just take your price data, let's say a power price data for, I mean, not that this will work, so don't try it, but like you take price data of Germany, you put it in a linear regression to take like 10 legs, and then you make a prediction based on this. A quant will go perhaps on a look like, okay, I normalize my data. I look like at all the quanta. So power prices moved yesterday, like by 10 euros. This would be like in 10 euros on power prices in Germany for the car is a lot. So this would be a really high move, like a extreme move. And then you could compare historically. You look at 2 years data and you see like what happened afterwards. If I was in this high move environment or this high volatility environment, what happened on the day afterwards? And then if you see normally, for example, you could say, okay, with a probability of 60% after this extreme move, the prices reverted down. You could do a model and say, okay, if I observe this high move, I go short. So I will sell Cal and I bet that the prices go down. I mean, this will be one idea which could come to the same conclusion as a data science model, but it's a different approach. Both use data and kind of train, because depending on where you set your border, it could be a 10% quantile move or a 5% quantile move and so on. So you have a training and a fitting phase, but this is kind of a different approach in my view. It's, a bit different, I would say. But quant work and this is less about Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo you could more use for pricing as a quant. So you run a simulation and you get a price. For example, on my work, as I said, my department, we go and have this power purchasing of wind parks. Not wind parks itself, but the power of wind parks. So the question there is like, what will be the short-term risk? Because I'm doing just the short-term. What will be the short-term risk in 2 years? For this, I need to know where the whole wind in Europe is going and what will be the price of this in 2 years. Because I need to make a quote for, let's say, our originator, or like our salesperson, like originator who goes to the client. So he needs to have a price. So I give him the price, and therefore I need to run simulation, what could happen, because it's kind of a probability. It can, it's less a prediction. It's more like an expected value, for example, because I know it will deviate from there. So it's not a forecast because I know it's going to be wrong, but it's more like a risk view. So yeah.
Okay. Could you explain Monte Carlo in a few sentences? How does a simulation work? I find it quite interesting.
I mean, it's I would say rather easy. So if you simulate different stochastic processes, so you can assume like distributions, you can take historical distributions or other things, and then you run these distributions and you look at how they interact numerically. It's basically a numerical approach to mixing distributions, easy said, and then you can see like how it will converge. For example, the issue with this is often that you only observe like 1 year of data or 2 years which is relevant. So let's say in Europe, the short term has changed a lot during the last few years. So there has been way more wind parks and solar parks because Germany and every European country basically is building more wind and solar. But Germany was kind of a front runner. Like they built a lot of wind and solar power. So the issue is since it's changed so much, you cannot go back 10 years. I mean, I have data for 10 years perhaps, but 10 years ago, the data is kind of useless because it's such a different environment now. So with Monte Carlo simulations, I don't just take historical costs of 1 year. I can run what would have been a fair price if this would have happened based on different stochastic process, which I can interfere and see, okay, this is kind of an expected value. It's because 1 year is just has a huge variance. You can need, and you need to filter out this variance because what's the issue with variance is for example, you have seen the cost on the short term for a wind park was in 2019 was huge, but perhaps you were kind of unlucky. So perhaps wind is still huge, but this was extremely huge. So you don't want to give for 2021, for example, the 2019 price, what you observed, because this might be way too high and then you don't get the contract. I mean, the goal is to sign contracts and to manage more assets. So we want to give a fair price, which is kind of what, perhaps in 2021 it will be low again, perhaps, but we want to know what is the expected price, and then we can manage the risk.
Okay. Wow. Sounds sounds like you got a lot of things going on. Sounds very complex. Not only have to think about the data, but all the contracts and managing. Um, so I wanted to ask you about this. You are responsible for trading at Axpo, and that's like trading energy, as I understand, on a daily basis. Can you tell us, put into perspective, what is the amount of funds that you are responsible for trading every year?
I will say it's the data, the models which are live on the market, which, I mean, I only trade over models basically. Currently, there are around, let's say, 20 millions a year, which gets traded over these models.
20 million euros.
Yes.
Okay. That is a huge amount. And like, how do you approach this? Like, for instance, what's what kind of like things do you look at? Tell us like about your day to day. What is involved in your day to day as a quant on the trading space?
So since my department is mainly basically origination, or let's say kind of contact with clients, there are not some, like, we don't have like a huge department with a lot of quants. So I do a lot of different stuff, which I really like. So it's really a lot of variance. So I started as a data scientist, but I kind of, I mean, as a mathematician, I use more and more quant models, but so it's really different. So sometimes I do pricings, which is more like, let's say, quant related, where I run simulations and see what will happen in 2 years, or what is my view on 2 years with the short-term pricings. But sometimes there's a new contract, for example, for a steel client, or not steel, but like another, let's say, for example, a grid loss client. Then we need to forecast the grid losses. So I get a lot of data, and then the thing is, I need to build a model which goes and every day to the market and buys the energy to supply this client. And then I spend days working on this model, fine tuning it, looking that it works well. Then I put it live on the market and it starts trading. So it can be hugely variant, but I'm as well. Sometimes I trade manually. So sometimes I get calls to execute some trades on the market. So it's really a huge variance, which I really love about my job. So my day-to-day job looks basically every week different. It's always about like short-term trading, but it's sometimes really trading, like really going to market and trade imbalances. Like we get live updates from a lot of wind parks, and sometimes we need to go and manage them manually. Then I build models, like let's say data science, machine learning models, would try to predict as good as possible different client profiles. Then I do the pricing on the short term, so it's really quantitative related. I would say these are the main three things. I would say most of my time I spend doing prescriptive analytics. So I try to understand what's happening. A lot of the times, if you really understand what actually happened, then you can adapt your models to be better, build features, or do really simple adjustments in the future. It's really a lot of things. It's so many things going on, and every day you get a lot of feedbacks. You have so much data coming back every day from each European country, so much price data, things that happen, things that might go wrong. And then you need to understand kind of what happened. Like, I mean, for example, COVID was an interesting time period out of several aspects. Just on the market. So at the beginning of the lockdown, everything shut down. But we don't like how it short-term works on energy trading, on power trading. You trade the next day. So I trade tomorrow at 12 o'clock today. So I need to make a forecast today at 12 for tomorrow, 24 hours. So during COVID, what happened was kind of that all your demand forecasts, because you don't know which factory shut down when, which machine, or like which which homes did more energy during this time, or like what kind of, nobody knew kind of what's going to happen exactly. I mean, everybody expected it. There would be less demand, but when and how? Like you need to forecast on an hourly basis. It gets traded on an hourly basis in most European countries. But for example, in Germany, you can trade up to 15 minutes. So yeah, what I mean with 50 minutes, you can trade 50 minutes delivery times. So it's really short, like you can need to be really precise. So this during this time period, all your data, demand data, was kind of wrong, but you never knew kind of how wrong. So what happened in the market was kind of that, not everywhere, but there was too much energy produced because people thought, okay, they will need it, but at the end they needed it. So the market was loaded with energy. And at the end, the balancing mechanism needed to take out energy. So there was too much energy around on the short term. Stuff like this, you need to understand and think about, okay, was it just now, or it will be the future? Like, how long will this trend last? For this kind of period where everything shut down, it was really short because this happened during a week, and then you knew, okay, now we have on the new levels, and markets got regulated or normal again. But there are other trends, and you're thinking like, okay, well, why is this happening? What could be the cause of it? And how could I adapt it to it? So how could I position myself to not get harmed by it and manage the risk?
Okay. So you mentioned you do like several things, several different things. Are you able to share a use case with us to just like give an example?
Yes, for example, I think one really interesting use case was grid loss. So if you pump energy,
what is grid loss?
Exactly, like if you pump energy through a cable, the energy gets lost on the way. So if you have a starting point and end point, you pump energy in at the starting point and you take out energy on the end point, there will be a difference because during transport, you lose energy
How much energy you lose?
Actually, on percentage, I'm not so sure. I mean, it's not that much. I mean, depends on the cable. Like if it's high frequency, low frequency,
the distance,
like a lot of stuff, how many transformers you have, and so on. But like on an actual level, I don't know. To be honest.
Okay.
I mean, what I did was the use case was like we needed to supply this energy on the day ahead. So I got like 1 year of data or like 2 years of data. And then the idea was to forecast this for the next day. So for over a different time period. And this grid losses, I mean, there are a lot of physical factors on what are dependent, like high frequency, low frequency, or other things like, but these are all static factors. So this is really easy to spot with your data. You can, the level, you can easily, you can really mark down these levels. But there are like variable technical losses on grid losses. So these variable losses, they are basically dependent on how much energy runs through it. So the longer the cable and the more energy runs through it, the higher the grid loss. And this is kind of where the problem starts. It's really difficult. Like we're not speaking about grid loss if, I don't know, in a small home. It's like on like a country level of one of a European country. So it's kind of a big grid loss with a big cable. And so like how much energy runs through it, and it's temperature dependent, which temperature you take. You have a whole country. So, I mean, or like there are many factors. And then with more renewable energy, normally renewable energy is not produced where people live. So this is a good example is Germany. Like there are a lot of wind parks in the north of Germany, but a lot of people live in the south of Germany. So if wind gets produced, it needs to be basically transported like from north to south. So there's more grid loss based on renewables. But for example, on the other side, if you have more solar panels on your rooftops, these people have less grid losses because they don't need energy from the grid. And so on, or like wind parks, for example, you have huge offshore wind parks in front of Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and so on. And if they produce, they have a long time to get to the people because they are offshore, like they're out in the ocean, basically. out in the sea. So this takes way more time. So a lot of, I would say, this makes it really interesting. So it's not just like price data. It's really kind of, there are fundamental things why this grid loss is happening. It's temperature dependent. Then it's dependent on solar production, wind speed, and other things. And on top, then another difficulty is the demand itself, like how much energy is actually needed. It's difficult to pin down. So, like for example, since it's the full country, if you look at grid losses near a city, this is really dependent on how much energy the city produces. So, for example, if temperature goes up, the city perhaps heats more, so it needs more power to actually produce heat. So there might be more grid losses, and all these factors come together. And if
you mean if the temperature goes down, they need more heat?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Or if temperature goes down, they need more heat, so grid losses might go up. Or, so, for example, in summer, if it's too hot, they turn on AC, and they need energy as well. So there are other factors to take into account, which are not linear. And the issue comes with, I mean, if you would know all these inputs exactly, it would not be that big of an issue. Like, it would still be difficult because which temperature? And so, like, there are other questions, or like wind production, the one in the north or the one in the south, or which solar, and so on. There's a lot of uncertainty. But the worst thing is, like, all this data we are using, we need to decide this today for tomorrow. So, for example, wind and solar.
So like, you don't know the wind speed tomorrow. You don't know the temperature in different areas tomorrow. You don't know what, like, all of your inputs are unknown as well.
Exactly. So all of these inputs, there are other forecasts. So, and for example, wind production, let's say wind production has an MAP of around 15 to 20%. So it's huge.
What's an MAP?
Mean absolute percentage error. So like if you look at your forecast model, wind production can be wrong up to 20%, or I mean, can be wrong even more, but like in average, the absolute error is about 20% wrong of your wind production on the day ahead. So today for tomorrow, I have an error up to 15 to 20% error in my forecast. This is just for wind. Then solar is extremely wrong as well. So it's difficult to forecast solar. I mean, just imagine it's no clouds at all tomorrow. You don't see anything on the radar, like on your models, on your weather models. But sometimes there's a small cloud. You don't spot them, but there might be exactly when you want to produce your at noon. So you have your high peak. You want to produce as much as possible, and perhaps then exactly then there's a small cloud over your solar panel. So yes, this is kind of impossible to forecast. Like how there's no way to forecast this on a day ahead. So therefore, all these inputs I take, they're hugely wrong, and I know they're wrong. So I need to deal with how wrong will they be, and how could I study the data itself. So what I did, and like this was really kind of describing what I see. Okay, if I look at wind, can I spot like how big their error is in or in which direction? For example, I don't receive only data for the next day. I receive wind data like yesterday for tomorrow, 3 days ago for tomorrow, 4 days ago for tomorrow. So one idea could be
so you receive the wind forecasts.
Yes.
Which were in place a day ago for tomorrow, 2 days ago for tomorrow, and so on.
Exactly.
Interesting. So you can observe how the forecast changed over time.
Exactly. So this could be a feature to study, like change if assuming like if it changes a lot, does it make the wind forecast worse or better? The same thing. Like, can you spot like, okay, perhaps I know now, okay, wind might be wrong tomorrow. Should I position myself differently? Like, should I really just look at the day plus one, or should I look at like deep day plus two, day plus three, day plus four, and look at the different things? So there's like not just a time perspective that I need to forecast 24 hours. So like I need to forecast 12, 1, 2, 3, and so on. I need to look at like the data itself. Like, okay, the forecast for 1 o'clock tomorrow, I have one today. I had one yesterday. I had one 3 days ago, and so on. So I can study this as well. So the data I have is kind of a lot. The same thing goes also true for solar, for temperature forecasts. Then there's like demand forecasts, how much each city needs, and so on. Or like area, it's more area, not like city per se, but like area. And all these things changes, and they have variances, they have uncertainties. Is there a way, like you need to think about, like, okay, is there a way to analyze the different wind inputs? All of these things have impact on the grid loss. So at the end, this is kind of interesting about my job. I start a model and I get feedback immediately. So I start trading today, and basically tomorrow during the day, I can see if I kind of was right. Okay, metering takes a bit of time, but like, let's say I start trading today, and like in 5 days, I got my feedback. So if I was right or wrong, or was my action good or bad. So this is kind of really, I would say, rewarding and challenging, since it's short term, like to think about, okay, was it right or wrong? So I get immediate feedback. And there's a lot of data to think about, all the different wind forecasts and solar production. And then you can think of more things. For example, grid losses get increased as well if, but just as a random example, Switzerland, if they buy energy from Germany or import energy from France, it's a different, like higher grid loss. If they take it from France, then they will produce it inside of Switzerland. So you need not just to think about one country, you need to think about several countries. One big country we always think about is like Germany, because they have so much wind production. So what's happened if Germany doesn't produce that much wind? They import a lot of energy, and but if they have too much energy and they produce a lot with their wind production, they flow to other Europeans' market with their energy. So there's a high cross-border trade, like the cross-border trade activity is really high. So it's not just like you need to focus on one country. Yeah, basically all Europe need to worry about and to think about, like, okay, how could this impact? I mean, of course, if you look at Spain, you don't need to worry too much, let's say, about Ukraine, because like there's long distance, and there's actually, I never looked at this data, but like I suppose there's not much correlation going on. But like countries between, like, let's say, Belgium and France, they have huge impact on each other, or mostly France has impact on Belgium because Belgium is a small country. But I mean, in relation to France, of course. But there's so many things going on and so much data to consider, and all of this data I have basically is wrong, because there's high uncertainty in each data point. And yeah, I think this is really interesting to study, because you can spend an eternity just going through, okay, what happens if, I don't know, wind forecast 10 days ago was huge, like on a huge different quantile level, hugely different than 1 day ago, or 2 to 3, and so on. So there's so much data around, and it makes it really interesting.
So how did your grid loss case study end?
I mean, I produced a model. Actually, this was really difficult to produce a model. I think I got a good model, which generalizes well. So I did all the testing, but actually there was a third party who claimed they could do better. And then this was the challenge. So my management wanted, of course, okay, we should do the same thing, or we should be even better than they are. Why are we worse? We had like a shadow trading, we call it, like when we get the third party's inputs on a day-to-day basis, but we don't actually trade them. The issue is, like, nobody sends a backtest. So if you're a third party, you send a backtest and you say, okay, this is what we have done. But yeah, as I said, nobody sends a bad backtest. So you never know if it's overfit or not. So definitely you have this shadow trading where you go and see, okay, what is kind of the real out of sample testing? Because if their out of sample performance is like their in sample performance, they should behave the same way. I mean, more or less the same way. If you receive day to day their data, then it should replicate their backtest. I mean, hopefully.
So what is schedule trading?
Like shadow trading is like we are interested.
Oh, shadow trading. You're trading, but
I'm sorry. Shadow trading.
Yeah, sorry, I heard schedule. Okay, shadow trading. So you're trading like a demo version, like you're not trading real money.
Exactly. We are not trading it, but we receive the data from this other company who says like we would have done that. Because if you receive it on a day-to-day basis, they cannot cheat because we already got it. So they don't actually know what's going to happen. So therefore, let's say for grid losses,
you can evaluate.
Exactly. So we can have like an out-of-sample testing. The issue with this is, we cannot do this forever. Like trading is really like short-term. Market's changing a lot. So if you have something which works, you don't want to do this for 2 years. So you want to go fast to the market. So there's the issue, like you produce perhaps a backtest for 1 year, but then your out of sample testing cannot be in 1 year. So perhaps you have like 2 or 1 month, let's say, like just as an example, 1 month where you can evaluate like the out of sample. Perhaps it was a bad 1 month. So like, why was it bad? Like, is it still a good idea, or was it actually bad? Like, there's so many things that to consider. It could be just a bad month, and then you will say, okay, do it anyways, because we can explain why it was a bad month. But perhaps it was a really good month, and then you start actually trading it, and it goes south. So it's really hard to evaluate because you don't want to do it too long. Then you lose value because your ideas change. But if you do it too short, you cannot have not a statistical sample actually to extrapolate. So how meaningful your out of sample testing is like, as a data scientist, you want to have as much data as possible. As a trader, you want to generate value as soon as possible. So you have this trade-off between testing and actually generating money. So with this grid loss case, it was difficult. Actually, I tried a lot of things. The issue is why it's so difficult is like there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. So and a lot of things who could go wrong, and because you have so much wrong inputs to your model, so you really don't want to overfit. So you need to think really deep about, okay, perhaps I have 4 months where my model didn't behave really good. The question was why? Because if I just build a model which would take this into account, it could be an overfit. Because perhaps this situation will not generalize in the future again. So I need to know why it performed bad. I need to know why it happened, because if I just build more features, perhaps it might fix it. I mean, you can build higher complexity always, and you can introduce more features, build a higher complex model. And this will fix your issue on your test set and your training set. But if you look at if you look at your test set several times because your manager came back and said like, oh, do it again, then you kind of might overfit. So you need to balance between overfitting and generalization. I mean, this is always the case, but the difficulty was like the third party said like, our model generalizes better. At the end, I improved a little bit the model with new features, more analysis on the data, capture more uncertainty on the inputs. But at the end, we said as well, like, nobody sends a bad backtest. So the third party, we said like, okay, your backtest was really too good to be true. I mean, I don't say they did a wrong job or they wanted to trick us, but it's really difficult to actually generalize well always. I mean, the problem, the issue with even if you think your training and test error are good balanced, they might not be, because there might be some factor which you don't consider.
Okay, very interesting case study. Interesting. I like the trade-off you described about testing and trading, how the markets change really fast, and it's a different thing, like not something you often see in data science, this trade-off. So I guess it's specific to applying data techniques in market conditions. Tell us a bit about your hackathon. On LinkedIn, I read that you won an international hackathon on predictive modeling of spot prices. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Exactly. So, I mean, as Axpo, I did a hackathon for Axpo.
Yeah.
So I mean, Axpo organized everything. It was for students, so they invite. I mean, every student could have come, but mostly it was ETH students who study informatics, mostly in machine learning and data science actually. So it was a hackathon for students mainly. It was really nice. So we went for 3 days in a power plant from Axpo, somewhere in the mountains.
So this was before you worked at Axpo?
I joined once as a student, and once I was the organizer. So I mean, I was not part of renting a room or something like this, but I got the use case, and then I prepared the use case. So I gathered all the data. I wrote like a environment how students can submit their models and how I could models. Like the use case was we have a lot of these wind parks which we manage the energy. For example, this use case especially was like in the Nordics region, like really north of Europe. All of this, not all of these wind parks, but some of these wind parks, they send quite real life data. So you have a feed in, like let's say every 50 minutes of measurement data of how much the park is producing, and you can calibrate your new model like for the end of the day. So you have like an intraday market as well. So you could see if you are really wrong on day ahead, perhaps you should adjust your intraday updates. So you can trade as well. So since we have a lot of parks, perhaps the use case was perhaps there's a correlation we don't see yet between different parks. So for example, in the east of this Nordic country, there was a huge error, but in the west not yet. Perhaps in an hour the error will be there as well, because I mean so just as an interesting like example, but there could be different correlations which we don't see yet. I mean, this is just one example, but like perhaps there are things we don't consider yet in our data because we have so much data. Normally, how wind forecasting works is like you have a position, you give this to a third party. They will do a mapping between a wind model, like they look at weather data and everything, and they do a mapping how much your wind park produces based on the location it is, which wind turbine it is, and so on. So it's kind of a standalone basis, let's say, like this. But perhaps they miss a correlation between different mappings. So, like, if there was an error in the east, this error could happen in an hour later in the west or in the south and north. Other things, like perhaps you can interfere from one wind park to the other one. So what we did, I gathered all the data from each country for all the wind parks we have. And then we gave all this data to the students. So we gave wind speed data, wind temperature measurements, forecast measurements, price data. No price data, was just trying to improve the wind forecast itself. Like how much is going this turbine to produce? This was kind of the use case. It was a really interesting. I mean, it's really fundamental. You need to start to think about how a wind turbine produces energy, how it's dependent on wind speed and other things. And the funny thing in the Nordics country is turbines can freeze. So if temperature is too low, even if you have wind, if it's frozen, it's not going to produce something. So I think this makes it really interesting. If they freeze, you have a really huge decrease in production.
Interesting. So how did it go? Did the students solve the hackathon?
I mean, actually, there was at the end one model, which was really a simple one with a good idea, which was a bit better than the baseline. Honestly, I would say that it was a good hackathon. The students tried a lot, and I think it was interesting for everyone. But I would say to some extent it was a bit difficult, perhaps as well. Like first thing, you need to understand how, like, we introduced them to like the head market works, how intraday market works, when you can trade something, and how a wind turbine is built, how it's producing based on wind inputs, they need to get everything was in Python. So they they know Python, but we build like libraries for them that they can access data and other things. I would say like 3 days was just not enough to solve this issue.
Wow.
They tried a lot, and I think it was really interesting to see how they progress. We did like, I would say every half day, we did a stop where I evaluated all the current models. So they submitted something, I evaluated them and gave them feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a round of discussions. It was really fun to see how they evolve in 3 days. So at the beginning, the first models were like, okay, let's just try to load the data, do something, and submit something. So there were very simple models like linear regressions or something that's very simple with some inputs. The second models then were like, okay, they used all their techniques. So they took a lot of data, built features, put it in a huge models with like high high degree of complexity, and then they fitted everything. And this was the second round, and then everyone was really disappointed. Like I had a hidden test set where I evaluated all of their models, and they didn't have access to it. So it was kind of they only could test basically 4 times. So they had one test set, they split it itself in training and test, but there was one set which only I had. And then the second one was really disappointing. Like they tried so much. With one student, I think I stayed until 3:00 in the room in the morning just that he was able to finish his training. But then it was kind of disappointing because the second one was worse than the first. What happened was that models were too high complexity. They didn't generalize well outside of their set. So then in the third round, they all cut back. So they went on filtered on features, they filtered on data, they filtered on the complexity and tried to reduce it. So it was really interesting to see like how it evolved. And it was really fun. At the end, we had one model which was better than the baseline. But overall, perhaps we should have chosen a easier use case and to solve the issue with European wind production.
Wow. Very interesting. Interesting to see how people adjust how their thinking to them and change the models with your feedback. Okay, this didn't work, make it more complex, no, less complex, and so on. That was fun. Thomas, we're actually running out of time. It's been an hour. It's flown by real quick. Before we finish up, just one final question for you. What's your recommendation for somebody who wants to get into this space that you're in, into energy trading? Somebody who's maybe a data scientist or starting into the space of data science. What would you say is an important thing for them to look into as a first step?
I mean, if you really want to go to energy trading itself, I would say as a data scientist, you really need to want to do this. So it's finance dependent as well. So it's trading. So perhaps be interested in trading. Start a little bit of trading yourself. This always looks really nice. Even if you're a data scientist, if you kind of have the feeling of being a trader, or like you know what it is to press the button and actually do a trade. I think this is always welcome. So be interested in finance. Else, it's really good if you have some knowledge about like more like quantitative approaches. Like let's discuss in the beginning, like what's Monte Carlo simulation. I mean, a lot of people know it, but like it's not always. Let's say if you're really IT heavy and you went from IT side to data science, it's not necessary that you did it. But yeah, this could be something which is really a plus on your CV. Both these things.
Awesome. That's a cool idea. So yeah, look into what trading is all about. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Thomas, for coming. It's been a pleasure. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners get in touch with you and find you? What's the best places to connect?
I mean, just drop me a message on LinkedIn and I try to respond.
Okay, awesome. And one final question for you. What's a book or books you can recommend for our listeners?
I would say I recommend 2 books. One is Systematic Trading from Robert Carver. This is about data science. It's more about trading in general, and it gets you thinking about like how could I use a data approach or a quantitative approach for trading. It's a really nice book, really applied book about how to build a framework for quantitative trading. But yeah, and it starts you thinking about how to generalize ideas. And another book, I mean, most times I just read papers, but as a student, I went through deep learning from Ian Goodfellow. It's a long book, but I thought it was worth it. So it's really in detail, and I really like to read through it. It takes some time. I think it's like 800 pages, but if you've done it, then I think it's really nice.
Is that the one that's for free?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's from MIT Press, so you can buy it on Amazon. But there's as well like HTML links where you can access chapters for free. So it's
I think it's like deeplearningbook.org. That's the website. It's been recommended a few times. So yeah, you can. It's Ian Goodfellow and Yoshua Benjo and Aaron Corville. You can access it there for free if you're interested. It was a good book.
I think it's a really nice book. I mean, it's if you read through it, I think you know everything about like networks and deep learning, and it's a nice book to read through.
It's about 4 years old though. Like, do you think it's still up to date? Like, it's still relevant?
Depending on which level you are, I would say. So if you are a student, and I think it's still on ETH lecture list. So they have a lecture at ETH deep learning. I've not looked this year, but like this book was on the list of lectures. So they go through part of this book in the lecture. I would say if you want to get into deep learning, this book covers it very well. I mean, if you are a front runner in the research, yeah, perhaps not. Like then it's I would recommend something differently. But depending on which level you are, I thought like as a book, it gives you a really good overview of all the concepts, or more of a lot of the concepts. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for the recommendations. And on that note, we're gonna wrap up. Thanks a lot, Thomas, for coming on the show. It was good fun.
Thank you very much.
So there you go, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As mentioned at the beginning, it was quite advanced and a lot of topics. I'm sure we could have dove into many of them, but we touched on quite a lot of topics. Very briefly so, my favorite part was the trade-off between testing and trading. It kind of resembles the whole trade-off between exploration and exploitation. And in this case, once you have a model that you've back-tested and you've verified that works, then you want to forward test it. Basically, you want to put it onto the market and shadow trade it for a bit to make sure that maybe that your model wasn't overfitting, that you're out of sample test, and moreover, not just out of sample test, but out of sample test on the live data that comes in with all this glitches and all the delays and lags and everything else that resembles the real world markets. Some things that are quite hard sometimes to recreate in back tests, even with out of sample back tests. You want to put it on and shadow trade it for a bit, but the question is for how long. If you shadow trade it for 4 months, you might get your validation, but by then markets might have changed, and as soon as you switch to real trading, boom, it's no longer working. On the other hand, if you shadow trade for too short, for a week, you might not get enough data to validate that it's working, and when you switch to live trading again, boom, it's not working. So an interesting balance. I love these situations when it's time to decide a balance, and surely there isn't one right answer. It's on a case-by-case basis. Maybe there's some guiding principles, but it's ultimately an art that data scientists have to participate in. And I'm sure you had your own favorite parts from this episode. As always, the show notes are available at superdatascience.com/405. That's superdatascience.com/405, where you can find the transcript for this episode, any materials we mentioned, and URLs to connect with Thomas. Hit him up on LinkedIn, especially if you're interested in the space of energy or quantitative analysis of markets and trading. I'm sure you'll be happy to help out. And yeah, and if you know somebody in this space, very easy to send them the episode to share. Just send them the link, superdatascience.com/405. On that note, thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, happy analyzing.